This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas. We're diving deep into a 1988 paper by Lawrence A. Blum, Gilligan, and Kohlberg, Implications for Moral Theory.
Yeah.
It's a dense read, so buckle up because we're about to unpack some groundbreaking ideas.
This paper really shook up the world of moral philosophy. You know, it really challenged the idea that that morality is just about applying a set of universal rules.
Right.
Like some ethical equation.
But one size fits all morality.
Yeah. Exactly.
And that's where things get interesting, right? The paper delves into the work of two big names in moral development, Lawrence Kohlberg and Carol Gilligan.
Kohlberg, you see, was all about impartiality. He believed that morality just boiled down to things like justice, fairness, using logic to make decisions.
Okay.
Kind of like those classic ethical theories, utilitarianism, Kantianism, where you're weighing the consequences or following absolute rules.
Okay, so Kohlberg was team universal rules.
Yes.
But what about Gilligan? She had a different voice.
Exactly. Gilligan, especially through her research with women, found that there's this whole other way of approaching moral dilemmas. It's not that she was against impartiality altogether.
Right.
But she argued that moral maturity is way more complex than just following rules.
So it's not an either situation. It's more like a both hand.
Precisely. And this is where Blum's analysis really shines. You know, he lays out 7 key differences between Gilligan's care ethics and Kohlberg's impartialist view.
Okay.
For example, Gilligan emphasizes the situated self. Our moral choices aren't made in a vacuum.
Right.
They're shaped by our relationships, experiences, our whole life story, really.
So it's like our moral compass needs more than just a set of universal coordinates.
Yeah.
It needs to account for the unique terrain of our lives.
That's a great way to put it. It's not just about knowing the rules. It's about understanding the people those rules apply to. And that takes empathy, emotional intelligence, real moral skills, according to Gilligan.
Okay, so context matters.
Yeah.
What else makes Gilligan's care ethics different?
Well, she also focuses on the particular other. It's not just about applying abstract principles.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the specific needs and experiences of the individual you're dealing with.
Right.
You wouldn't respond to a close friend's crisis the same way you'd respond to a stranger's.
Absolutely.
Even if the situation seems similar on the surface, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Our relationships color how we see situations and how we act. So
Right.
yeah, it's not a one size fits all approach to moral problems.
Exactly. And that leads to another important distinction, the idea that moral knowledge is hard won. It's not something you just download. It takes real effort to understand another person's perspective, to see the world through their eyes.
It's like becoming a moral detective, piecing together all the clues to understand the nuances of each situation and individual.
I like that analogy. And this ties into another key difference, which is this idea that we're these totally independent, self-governing beings. Gilligan points out that we enter the world already connected to others, and these bonds, these ties to our loved ones, you know, they shape our choices, even our moral ones. You, for instance, you mentioned listener's known role, for example, parent, friend, sibling. Those rules influence how you see the world.
Right. That's so true. We're not just applying rules in isolation. We're always navigating a web of relationships, and it adds a whole other layer of complexity to moral decision making.
Right. And this leads us to a fascinating point of divergence between Kohlberg and Gilligan.
Yeah.
The role of emotions.
Yeah.
While Kohlberg focused mainly on rationality and logic, Gilligan argued that emotions are deeply intertwined with how we reason and act morally. Caring for someone involves both thinking and feeling.
It's like you can't just turn off your feelings and become this like cold, calculating moral machine. Our emotions, especially in relationships, are what motivate us to act, to connect with others, to actually care.
Precisely. Our emotions provide vital information about a situation. They guide our response. They're not just noise to be filtered out. They're part of the moral process itself.
Right.
And this brings us to another point where Gilligan departs from the traditional view, this idea of universal principles. She suggests that what's morally right in one context might not be universally applicable. It's not about relativism, it's about recognizing the incredible complexity of moral life.
It's like trying to use the same map to navigate a dense forest in a wide open plain. The terrain's different, so your approach has to be different too.
Exactly. And finally, we get to the heart of Gilligan's argument. Connection before principle. She believes that our sense of morality springs from our connections with others. We act to preserve and strengthen those bonds, not just to follow abstract rules.
This makes so much sense. It's not just about ticking boxes on some ethical checklist. It's about recognizing that our relationships, they generate genuine moral obligations.
Yeah.
It's about being there for each other, especially when it truly counts.
Precisely. It's about understanding that our moral responsibilities aren't just external rules imposed upon us, but flow from the very fabric of our relationships.
Yeah.
Now, of course, these ideas sparked quite a bit of debate. Kohlberg and other supporters of the impartial view had some pretty strong reactions to Gilligan's challenge.
So not everyone was on board with this whole care ethics thing.
Definitely not. There was a whole spectrum of responses, from folks who tried to dismiss care ethics as merely personal to those who tried to, fit it into the existing framework of impartialism.
So like some people were trying to shoehorn this new perspective into the old way of thinking.
Exactly.
I'm curious to hear how they tried to do that.
Well, that's a story for part 2, but before we dive into those counter-arguments, let's pause for a moment. What are your initial thoughts on all of this? What's resonating with you so far? Take a moment to consider which parts of Kohlberg's and Gilligan's views feel most aligned with your own understanding of morality. We'll be back in a flash to tackle those rebuttals and delve even deeper into the implications of care ethics. Thank you to our community, which now spans 59 countries within 394 cities in 15 languages, with auto-translated captions on YouTube and our English closed captions on all providers. Such a wide range of ages, mostly 18 and older. Thank you to those who have subscribed or followed on your podcast, provider, and Substack. You are widely outnumbered by those that have not yet subscribed. It makes a difference to independent producers like Heliox. Please consider following, subscribing, and liking. Start a discussion on the episode content. Listen to the end for the Substack address. Back to Heliox, where evidence meets empathy.
All right, welcome back. Before the break, we were starting to touch on how some philosophers push back against Gilligan's care ethics. It sounds like they had some pretty strong opinions about it.
Oh, they definitely did. Remember those 7 key differences between Gilligan and Kohlberg?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of folks tried to argue that those differences didn't actually undermine impartialism at all.
So they were basically trying to fit a square peg into a round hole?
Yeah.
Trying to make care ethics fit into the traditional way of thinking about morality?
Exactly. One of their main arguments, and this was a big sticking point, was that caring for people might be nice.
But it's not essential to being moral. They claimed it was more like going above and beyond the call of duty, what philosophers call supererogatory.
So they were basically saying that caring is like getting extra credit points, but the real test of morality is whether you're following those universal rules.
That's a great way to put it. They were trying to create this hierarchy of moral actions with impartial duties at the top and care-based actions relegated to a lower tier.
But didn't Blum have something to say about that? I mean, it seems like he was pretty passionate about the moral importance of care.
He definitely did. Blum argued that this attempt to separate care from impartial duty was completely missing the point. He pointed out that caring for those in our immediate circle, our loved ones, our friends, it's not some optional add-on to morality. It's woven into the very fabric of how we live and make decisions.
It's like saying that being a good parent is just about providing food and shelter, but we all know there's so much more to it than that, right? It's about nurturing, supporting, and being there for your kids in a way that goes beyond just fulfilling basic obligations.
Exactly. Blum argued that many of the most morally significant actions in our lives come from a place of care and concern for others. Think about comforting a grieving friend or helping a neighbor who's fallen on hard times. These actions often fall outside of any strict definition of duty, yet they're absolutely essential to living a morally good life.
So it's not just about following the rules, it's about responding to the needs of others in a way that's sensitive and compassionate.
Exactly. And he also pointed out that this attempt to relegate care to the realm of the supererogatory completely overlooks the fact a lot of caring actions are spontaneous and unreflective. They're driven by instinct and emotion, not by some carefully calculated decision-making process.
Right, like that time I saw a stranger's kid trip and fall, and I instinctively ran over to help them up and make sure they were okay. I didn't stop to think, okay, what's the moral rule here? Am I obligated to help this child? It was just an immediate, heartfelt response.
That's a great example. And Blum argued that these kinds of instinctive, care-driven responses can be just as morally significant as any carefully considered rule-based decision. In fact, he suggested that this kind of moral intuition, if you will, is often developed through our relationships with others. It's like a muscle we build through the give and take of close connections.
So it's not just about learning the rules, it's about cultivating those capacities for empathy, responsiveness, and genuine care.
Exactly. And this brings us to another point of contention. Remember how Kohlberg emphasized rationality and universal principles?
Yeah.
Well, some folks try to argue that care ethics was somehow inferior because it wasn't grounded in these same principles.
So they were basically saying that care is all well and good, but it's not truly moral unless you can back it up with some grand universal rule.
Exactly. But Blum pushed back against that idea too. He argued that demanding this kind of universal justification was missing the whole point of care ethics.
Yeah.
He said that in the realm of personal relationships, actions motivated by care are inherently moral, precisely because they flow from those deep particularistic bonds.
So it's like saying that the love between a parent and child doesn't need to be justified by some abstract ethical principle. The love itself is what makes it moral.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And remember how we talked about the role of emotions in moral decision-making?
Yeah.
Well, Blum also argued that a purely impartial approach couldn't fully capture the nuances of these emotionally charged interactions.
Right. Like you can't just reduce helping a friend in need to a simple transaction of following the rules. It's about so much more than that, right? It's about expressing your care and concern in a way that meets their specific needs in that moment.
Exactly. And those emotional nuances, that deep understanding of the other person's experience, those are things that often can't be captured in some abstract universal principle. It's about being present, being attentive, and responding in a way that honors the unique dynamics of that relationship.
This is all reminding me of that moral detective analogy we talked about earlier. Yeah. It's not just about knowing the rules. It's about carefully observing, listening, and responding in a way that's truly sensitive to the individual and the situation.
That's such a great way to think about it. And Blum emphasized that this kind of nuanced responsive care isn't just nice to have. It's absolutely essential to fulfilling the moral demands of those close relationships.
So we're not talking about throwing out impartialism altogether. It's more about recognizing that both care and impartiality are crucial components of what it means to be a morally good person.
You got it. It's about embracing the complexity of moral life and understanding that that different situations call for different approaches. Now, I know we've been diving pretty deep into Blum's analysis here.
Yeah, and it's been fascinating.
Yeah.
But I'm also wondering what are the implications of all of this for our own lives? Like how do we actually put these ideas into practice?
That's a great question, and I think it's one that each of us needs to grapple with individually. How do we balance the demands of impartiality with the complexities of care in our own relationships? What role do emotions play in our own moral decision-making?
Right, like it's one thing to talk about these concepts in the abstract.
Yeah.
But it's another thing to actually live them out in the real world. It's like we've been given this amazing map, but we still have to figure out how to navigate the terrain ourselves.
And that's where things get really interesting.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, exploring this idea of care ethics as a legitimate moral perspective.
Yeah.
It's really made me rethink some of my own assumptions about what it means to be a good person.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most valuable things about diving into these philosophical debates. It challenges us to question what we think we know and to consider new ways of seeing the world.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up, I'm curious to hear more about your thoughts on the practical implications of care ethics. Like how do we actually bring more care into our lives? Not just in our personal relationships, but maybe even in a broader societal sense.
That's a fantastic question, and I think it gets to the heart of what makes this whole conversation so relevant. It's not just an academic exercise. It's about understanding how these different moral perspectives can actually shape the way we live and interact with the world around us.
Right. It's one thing to talk about care ethics in the abstract, but it's another thing to actually embody it in our daily lives.
Exactly, and I think one of the first steps is recognizing that care isn't just about our immediate circle of loved ones. It's also about cultivating a broader sense of empathy and concern for those outside our personal bubbles.
So like expanding that circle of care to include our communities, our society, even people we've never met.
Precisely. Think about the challenges we face as a society today. Things like climate change, social injustice, political polarization. These are complex systemic issues that require more than just applying a set of abstract rules. They demand that we tap into our capacity for empathy, compassion, and a willingness to see the world from multiple perspectives.
It's like we need to shift from a mindset of me versus them to a mindset of we're all in this together.
That's a powerful way to put it, and I think care ethics can offer a valuable framework for navigating these kinds of challenges. It reminds us that our actions have ripple effects. That our interconnectedness is not just some abstract concept, but a lived reality.
It makes me think about those random acts of kindness we talked about earlier, like helping a stranger carry groceries or simply offering a listening ear to someone who's struggling. Those small gestures might seem insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but they can have a profound impact on the individuals involved. And maybe, just maybe, those ripples of care can eventually create waves of positive change.
I love that image, and I think it highlights the fact that care is not just some passive emotion. It's an active force that compels us to engage with the world in a more compassionate and responsible way.
So it's not just about feeling empathy. It's about translating those feelings into meaningful action.
Exactly, and I think that's where the real work begins. It's about asking ourselves, how can I bring more care into my daily life? How can I be more attentive to the needs of others, not just those closest to me, but also those who are often marginalized or overlooked?
It's like challenging ourselves to see the world through a lens of care, to make choices that reflect our commitment to a more just and compassionate world.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And remember, this isn't about achieving some kind of moral perfection. It's about embracing the messiness and complexity of life and striving to be a little bit kinder, a little bit more understanding, and a little bit more responsive to the needs of those around us each and every day.
That's a powerful message, and I think it's a perfect note to end on. This deep dive has really given me a lot to think about, and I'm excited to continue exploring these ideas further.
Me too. And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. There's a whole world of moral philosophy and psychology out there waiting to be explored.
So to all our listeners out there, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep. And who knows, maybe you'll even discover your own different voice along the way.
Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other podcasts, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.